In a city where injustice lurks around every corner, Tasha Owens, a single mother, is about to face something she never expected. A simple walk home turns into a life-changing confrontation with the police. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking stories like this. Tasha never thought her evening would end like this. But when Officer Miller crosses the line, her fight for survival takes a shocking turn. She makes one call and the truth comes crashing down. It was a regular Tuesday evening when things spiraled out of control for Tasha Owens, a single mother of two, struggling to make ends meet. Tasha had just finished her shift at the local diner and was walking home, carrying a small bag of groceries. The cool evening air was refreshing as she made her way down the quiet street of her neighborhood. The city lights flickered on, casting a dim glow across the road. Her kids, Jamal and Ivy, were at home with their grandmother. So for the first time in a while, Tasha felt like she could breathe a little. But that peaceful moment didn't last long. As she neared the corner, a black and white police cruiser pulled up beside her. The engine hummed to a stop, and two uniformed officers, Officer Miller and Officer Jensen, stepped out of the vehicle. Tasha froze, her heart rate spiking for no clear reason. She'd had run-ins with cops before, but something about these two made her uneasy. "Evening, ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice loud enough to carry over the sound of passing cars. He was a tall man with a square jaw and a permanent scowl. Tasha nodded cautiously. "Evening, officer. I need to ask you a few questions," he said. "We've received some complaints about suspicious activity in this area. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Tasha immediately felt a wave of tension rush through her body. She wasn't doing anything wrong, and yet she could feel the officer's gaze intensifying, scanning her like she was some sort of criminal. It wasn't the first time she had felt the weight of discrimination. She had been pulled over for no reason, stared at in stores, and followed by security just because of her skin. "No, officer," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm just heading home." "Heading home?" Officer Jensen, the younger of the two, asked sarcastically, his tone dripping with suspicion. "What's in the bag?" Tasha's grip tightened on her groceries. She had a right to carry food from the store, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking for an excuse to escalate things. "It's just groceries, officer," she said firmly, trying to keep calm. "Is there a problem?" Miller didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a few steps closer, examining her more closely. Tasha's mind raced. Something about this interaction felt off. She tried to remain composed, but she could feel the tension building. The officers stood there for a long moment, their eyes studying her. Suddenly, without warning, Officer Miller reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey, let go of me," Tasha yelled, pulling her arm away from his grasp. But Miller wasn't listening. His grip tightened, and before Tasha could react, Jensen moved behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder with a force that sent her stumbling forward. "Stop resisting," Jensen barked, his voice full of authority. "I'm not resisting," Tasha shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "What are you doing?" "Ma'am, you're under arrest for interfering with an investigation," Officer Miller announced, as he yanked her arm behind her back. Tasha's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to break free. She wasn't about to let them drag her into something she didn't deserve. "You can't do this," she protested. "I haven't done anything wrong." Officer Jensen shoved her against the side of the patrol car, pinning her there with his body weight. The force of the push caused Tasha's groceries to fall to the ground, the contents spilling out in a chaotic mess. The more she struggled, the tighter their grip became, until Tasha felt the cold metal of the handcuffs click into place around her wrist. "You're coming with us," Miller said, his voice cold and detached. Tasha was in shock. She couldn't believe what was happening. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just walking home. The officers had no reason to arrest her, no justification. She had witnessed and experienced police harassment before, but this felt like it was escalating quickly, like it was personal. Just then Tasha heard the distant sound of a phone ringing. Her mind, desperate for a way out, grabbed onto the thought of making a call. Her brother, Marcus Owens, was an FBI agent. He could help. He had always told her that if she ever found herself in a dangerous situation, to call him. As she was being pushed into the back seat of the police cruiser, her mind raced. "I need to make that call." One of the officers was already in the driver's seat, and the other had closed the door behind her, trapping her inside. But before they could drive off, Tasha's phone buzzed in her pocket. Without thinking, she pulled it out and pressed the button, dialing Marcus's number. Her brother's voice came through the phone. "Tasha, what's going on? I can barely hear you," She wasn't sure how much time she had before the officers realized what she was doing. "Marcus, I'm in trouble. I've been arrested by 2 cops. Her voice caught in her throat as the weight of what was happening sank in. "Calm down. Where are you?" Marcus asked, urgently, his tone shifting to a more professional one. "They're taking me to the station. I don't know what to do." Tasha's words were rushed, her panic rising. "Stay calm, Tasha. I'm coming for you. Just hold on," Marcus said, before hanging up. As the car drove away, the reality of the situation began to settle in. Tasha wasn't just facing a night in jail. She was facing a battle that could escalate into something far worse. Her brother was the only one who could stop this, but would he make it in time? The cruiser's siren hummed in the background, the steady rhythm echoing through the quiet streets of the city. Tasha sat motionless in the back of the police car, her hands cuffed tightly behind her. The officers had ignored her protestations, her pleas to speak with someone, and the fact that she was a mother with children waiting at home. The only thing they seemed interested in was making an example out of her. The cool night air that had greeted her only a short while ago felt distant now. She couldn't shake the pounding in her chest. The call to Marcus had given her a glimmer of hope, but it was fleeting. What if he didn't get here in time? What if they didn't listen to him? Officer Miller drove in silence, his gaze fixed straight ahead, the weight of the tension hanging between them. Officer Jensen, in the passenger seat, occasionally glanced at the rearview mirror, his eyes cold and indifferent. The silence in the car was suffocating. Finally, Miller spoke, his voice like ice. "You think we're just going to let you walk away after what you did?" Tasha clenched her jaw, her eyes staring straight ahead. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. "I didn't do anything," she replied, her voice firm, despite the storm brewing inside of her. "You can't just arrest me for no reason." Jensen scoffed from the front seat. "No reason? You fought back. You attacked us, and now you're going to face the consequence." Her breath quickened at the accusation. She hadn't attacked anyone. She had simply defended herself. But these officers, she knew, weren't going to see it that way. To them, she was just another black woman, easy to push around, easy to dismiss. "You're making a mistake," she muttered under her breath, the words more to herself than to them. "You should have thought of that before you started resisting," Miller snapped. Tasha felt the anger rise in her throat. They were trying to justify their actions, twisting the truth and distorting the narrative. They didn't care about the truth. They were out to make her an example, to show her who was in charge. As the cruiser turned down a side street, heading toward the police station, Tasha's mind raced. She had to stay calm, had to think clearly. There was no telling how long she'd be stuck in this mess, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going down without a fight. She thought back to the call with Marcus. He was coming. He would get her out of this. She trusted him. Her brother had been her rock all these years, always looking out for her, always stepping in when things got bad. But what if he wasn't fast enough? She couldn't afford to wait around. The fluorescent lights overhead bathed everything in a sickly glow, making the place feel colder and more oppressive than it already was. The officers didn't say a word as they got out of the car, their footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. Tasha was jerked out of the vehicle and pushed roughly toward the entrance. Every step felt like a weight dragging her down further into this nightmare. She glanced around, trying to stay aware of her surroundings, but there was no one to help her, no one except Marcus. Where was he? They entered the station through the back door, and she was shoved into a holding cell. The door clanged shut behind her with a finality that sent a chill down her spine. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. She could hear the murmurs of other detainees in nearby cells, but all she could focus on was the sound of her own breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Tasha sat on the cold metal bench, her eyes never leaving the door. The officers who had arrested her were nowhere to be seen, but she could feel their presence lingering like a shadow. In the distance, a voice echoed through the halls of the precinct. The voice was low and urgent, but there was something familiar about it. "Mark," she jumped up, pressing her face against the bars, straining to hear. "Let her go," Marcus's voice rang out. It was calm, but there was an underlying anger in his words that made her heart swell with relief. "You have no right to keep her here." Tasha felt the breath leave her body. He was here. He had come for her. But before she could fully process what that meant, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching her cell. Officer Miller. He stood in front of her, his eyes full of contempt as he gazed through the bar. "You're lucky your brother's an FBI agent," he spat, his words dripping with venom. "Otherwise, we'd be teaching you a lesson right now." Tasha stood tall, refusing to show any fear. "You can't silence me. You can't make me afraid." Miller laughed darkly, then turned and walked away, leaving her alone again. Tasha waited, her mind swirling with the possibilities of what might happen next. She didn't know exactly what Marcus had done to get her released, but she knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them get away with this. And neither was she. As she sat there waiting for the moment when she could finally leave, she realized something. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. This wasn't just about a single arrest. This was about a broken system. A system that needed to be held accountable. And Tasha wasn't going to let it slide. Not now, not ever. Tasha sat in the holding cell, her thoughts a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and fear. It felt like she had been here forever, though it had only been a few hours. Her body ached from being thrown around, from the bruises, and the marks left by the rough treatment. She tried not to think about it, but her mind kept drifting back to those moments. To Officer Miller's smug grin. To the sound of her groceries crashing to the pavement. To the cruel way he'd grabbed her wrist. She wasn't just being held here for nothing. She could feel it. They wanted to make an example out of her. They wanted her to know that no matter how much she fought, they were always in control. But that thought only fueled the fire inside her. She was tired of being silenced. Tired of being pushed around. Her phone was still in her pocket, and it hadn't rung since she last spoke to Marcus. The thought of calling him again felt like a lifeline, but she didn't want to disturb him. She knew he was probably working, dealing with his own cases, trying to balance the job with the risk of coming to her aid. He was an FBI agent, high-ranking and influential, but he was also her brother, her protector. She trusted him more than anyone in the world, but even he had limitations. A loud noise echoed from down the hallway, shaking Tasha out of her thoughts. The sound of footsteps grew louder, her pulse quickened. This was it. The heavy metal door creaked open, and Tasha braced herself. The last thing she expected to see was Officer Jensen, the younger cop who had been silent during the earlier confrontation, walking toward her cell. He was alone, his expression unusually serious. He didn't speak as he approached, but there was something about his body language, almost hesitant, that piqued her curiosity. He stopped in front of her cell, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since the arrest. You shouldn't be here," he said softly, almost as though he were talking to himself. Tasha didn't trust him. He was still one of them, one of the officers who had treated her like a criminal for no reason other than her race. But there was something about the way he was acting that made her pause. "Shouldn't be here?" she asked, her voice edged with disbelief. "You're the ones who brought me here." Jensen shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "I know," he muttered. "I wasn't part of what happened earlier, but I don't like this. I don't like what's happening here." Tasha felt a flicker of hope, but she wasn't about to let her guard down. She had learned the hard way not to trust anyone too easily, especially not when it came to police officers. "You're here to make me feel guilty, right?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You want to tell me that you regret arresting me, but it doesn't change what happened." Jensen's eyes widened. He looked like he wanted to say something, but his words seemed to get caught in his throat. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then finally, he spoke. "I'm not here to apologize. I can't do that. But I do think this went too far. You didn't deserve what happened. No one deserves to be treated that way." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. Was he actually admitting it? Did he have some shred of conscience left? "I don't know what you want from me," she said, her voice still guarded. "But I'm not backing down. Not now." Jensen hesitated again, as though wrestling with his thoughts. "You're right," he said, his voice lower this time. "But there's something you need to know." Tasha leaned forward, a sense of dread creeping over her. "What is?" Jensen glanced over his shoulder, as if making sure no one was listening, then stepped closer to the bars of the cell. "There's more to this than you know. Officer Miller, he's not the only one behind this." Tasha's stomach churned. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "What do you mean?" "I overheard a conversation earlier." Jensen continued, speaking in a hushed tone. There are people in this precinct, higher-ups who've been watching you. They want to make sure you don't speak out. They're afraid of what you'll do next. Afraid of what I'll do, Tasha repeated, her voice incredulous. I'm just a single mom. What could I possibly do that would make them afraid? Jensen took a deep breath. They think you're going to expose them. That's why you're here. That's why they made sure to take you down. They want to make an example out of you, but it's bigger than that. Much bigger. Tasha's mind raced. This wasn't just a random act of cruelty, it was planned. She had been targeted, and the worst part, the officers knew exactly who she was. They knew her history, her background, and they knew about her brother Marcus. She felt a cold chill run through her veins. They had been watching her suddenly. She heard a familiar voice in the distance. Marcus. She couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the tone. He was angry, and he was close. The sound of Marcus's voice echoed down the hallway, growing louder as he drew nearer. Tasha's heart surged with a mix of hope and anxiety. Her brother had arrived, but was it too late? Was he going to be able to stop whatever was about to happen? Tasha shot a glance at Officer Jensen, whose eyes were now darting nervously between the door and her. He took a few steps back, his posture tense. Listen, I've said too much already, Jensen muttered under his breath, shaking his head. You have to be careful. This isn't just about you anymore. It's bigger than that. Tasha's mind raced. What was bigger than this? Was there something she didn't know? Something that could explain why she was targeted? She barely had time to process his words before the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. The door to her holding cell swung open with a sharp screech. Standing in the doorway was Marcus, his tall frame filling the space, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes locked. A silent exchange passed between them. The kind only siblings could share, relief, anger. And then, underneath it all, a quiet understanding that the fight wasn't over. Marcus, Tasha whispered, her voice breaking slightly as she stood up from the bench. Her hand instinctively moved to her side where the cuffs still burned against her skin. Don't say a word, Marcus replied, his voice low and controlled. He wasn't looking at her now, but at the two officers in the room. His eyes were sharp, calculating. The moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted, and the tension in the room thickened. Jensen stiffened, his hand reaching for the radio on his belt. But he didn't speak. Marcus wasn't here for pleasantries. He was here to make sure his sister was going to be all right. Step aside, Jensen, Marcus ordered, his voice commanding, but not loud. Just firm enough that it sent a chill through the younger officer. Jensen hesitated, then reluctantly took a step back, glancing nervously at Officer Miller, who was still in the background watching the scene unfold with arms crossed. Tasha Owens, Marcus began, turning to the officer, is my sister, and I'll have you know, I'll be filing a formal complaint if she's not released immediately. I'm taking her with me. Miller raised an eyebrow. You really think you can just walk in here and call the shots, Agent Owens? His voice was laced with condescension. Your sister attacked an officer. She's not going anywhere until we finish the paperwork. Marcus didn't flinch. You've already made your move. But you have no idea who you're dealing with. My sister didn't attack anyone. She defended herself, and you know it. Tasha's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. Marcus was here, and he was handling things. The confrontation in the cell was escalating quickly. The tension between Marcus and the officers was palpable. But Miller, the senior officer, wasn't backing down. His eyes locked on Marcus with defiance, clearly underestimating the FBI agent standing in front of him. Tasha's body felt light with a growing sense of hope, but her mind couldn't stop racing. This wasn't just a typical situation. She wasn't just a random victim here. This was personal, and Marcus knew that too. Release my sister, Marcus demanded again, his voice rising slightly. Now, there was a long silence before Miller stepped forward. His jaw clenched, his fingers tapping nervously on the grip of his baton. You think you can intimidate? Miller growled. You're in my precinct now, Agent Owens. You don't make the rules here. Marcus remained calm, his eyes never leaving Miller's. He wasn't intimidated. Not by Miller. Not by anyone. I'm not here to play games, Marcus said, his voice ice cold. I'm here for my sister, and if you don't release her, I'll have your entire precinct under investigation. That badge you're hiding behind isn't going to save you. Miller's face twitched, but before he could respond, a new voice interrupted. Is there a problem here, officer? The voice belonged to Captain Harris, the head of the precinct. He stepped into the room, his tall, broad figure filling the doorway. He took in the scene, noticing the tension between Marcus, the officers, and his sister. His eyes moved from Marcus to Tasha, and then back to Miller, assessing the situation carefully. Harris was a well-known figure in the precinct, and his presence instantly brought a shift in the room. The officers stiffened, and Miller seemed to hesitate. Marcus wasted no time. He stepped forward and addressed Harris, his voice unwavering. Captain Harris, I'm here to pick up my sister. She was wrongfully detained, and I'm here to ensure her immediate release. This needs to end now. Harris glanced at the officers briefly, then back at Marcus. His stern expression softened but just slightly. He clearly understood the gravity of the situation now. Harris had seen too much of this kind of thing before, officers stepping over the line, thinking they could get away with. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Agent Owens, Harris said, his tone professional but sincere. I'll make sure she's released immediately. There's been a misunderstanding. But just as things seemed to settle, Miller's face twisted in frustration. He took a deep breath, his fists clenched at his sides. This isn't over, Miller muttered, just loud enough for Marcus and Tasha to hear. You don't get to walk out of here scot-free. Marcus stepped forward once more, his gaze hardening. It is over, Miller, for you and for everyone who thinks they can get away with this kind of behavior. As Captain Harris nodded, signaling to the officers to unlock Tasha's cell, Marcus turned to her. His expression softened, but his eyes remained alert, scanning the room for any further threat. Let's go, Tasha, Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. Tasha, now free, stepped out of the cell, the cuffs falling away as the weight of the situation began to lift. She turned to thank Captain Harris, but before she could speak, he raised a hand. You're not the one who owes an apology here, he said, his voice low. But we'll make sure this doesn't happen again. Tasha stepped out of the precinct with a sense of relief, but it was bittersweet. The night air felt colder now, the weight of everything that had happened settling into her bones. She had been released, but this was far from over. The officers' anger, the threats, the way they had treated her, none of it could be forgotten. She wasn't just another case. This wasn't just a random act of police brutality. This was about something bigger. This was about the system. Marcus stayed close, walking beside her. He hadn't said much since the confrontation in the precinct, but his presence was enough. He was there for her, and that meant everything. I don't know what to say, Tasha finally whispered, breaking the silence. You don't have to say anything, Marcus replied quietly. I'm just glad you're okay. They continued walking, heading toward his car, the lights of the city flickering in the distance. But Tasha couldn't stop the questions swirling in her mind. What now? What would happen to the officers involved? What would happen to her? She had to make sure this didn't just disappear. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not now, not ever. That night, Tasha couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts running a mile a minute. Marcus had tried to reassure her that everything would be fine, but she wasn't convinced. She knew how the system worked. She knew how easy it was for things to get swept under the rug, for her voice to be silenced. But this time, she wasn't going to be quiet. This wasn't just about her. This was about every black woman who had ever been mistreated, who had ever been ignored. This was bigger than her. The next morning, Tasha got a call. It was from Captain Harris. Miss Owens, I wanted to personally reach out and offer an apology for what happened last night. We've reviewed the situation, and the officers involved are under investigation. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Thank you, Captain, she replied, her voice calm but with an underlying fire. But I want more than an apology. I want accountability. Harris was silent for a moment, and she could tell he was thinking carefully about his next words. I understand, he said slowly. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. You have my word. Tasha clenched her fists, but she didn't let the anger take over. This wasn't the end, but it was a step in the right direction. A week passed, and things began to settle, but the news about the incident was far from over. The viral video of the altercation had spread across social media, igniting a firestorm of conversations and protest. People were demanding justice, demanding answers. And Tasha? She had become a symbol. Her story wasn't just about one night of violence. It was about the systemic issues that had been affecting her community for decades. The more she read the comments, the more she saw the support pouring in from people she had never met, from people who shared her experience and her pain. It was overwhelming, but it was also empowering. She wasn't alone. One afternoon, Marcus called her. "Tasha, you've got a meeting with the department," he said. His voice was urgent. "They're ready to talk about the investigation. They want to make sure it's all handled properly." She took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. "I'll be there," she said, determination in her voice. "We're not stopping until we get the justice we deserve." At the meeting, Captain Harris and several other high-ranking officers sat across from her, and Marcus. The atmosphere was tense. Tasha could feel the weight of the room bearing down on her, but she wasn't backing down. She knew what she had to do. "We've reviewed everything," Harris began, his voice steady but somber. "The officers involved in your arrest have been suspended pending the investigation. We're taking this seriously. Suspended is not enough," Tasha said, her voice cutting through the air. "These officers need to be held accountable for their actions. I want them fired. I want them charged. You need to make sure this isn't just another case that gets swept under the rug." Harris nodded, acknowledging her point. "We understand. This is a turning point. We're committed to making real changes, and we'll do whatever it takes to make things right." The days that followed were a whirlwind. The investigation moved quickly, and the officers who had harassed Tasha were indeed fired. But the work wasn't over. The public outcry, the media coverage, and the protests were only growing stronger. People were finally speaking out, demanding an end to the abuse. Tasha knew that this was just one battle, but she also knew that this was her moment. She was part of something much bigger than herself, and she had the power to make a difference. Her voice mattered. Her fight mattered. Tasha walked out of the meeting with Marcus, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. There was still a long way to go, but for now she knew that the fight wasn't over, and she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever.